Um, I just saw a little bit of a clip put up by Forbes News about Governor Sarah Huckabee. You know who Huckabee is? The name Huckabee, yeah. Wasn't she in the White House as a press secretary, as I remember it? And now she's the governor of the state of Arkansas. I lived in Arkansas for a while. I went to the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville, and I'm familiar with the cult in Arkansas, cult programming, and how that relates to letters, fire letters, timelines, if you will, what I call word wars or games, number games, war gamers. And so she just announced on this video that she was going to, she did it. This was like a couple of days ago that she did it. She signed an executive order banning, and they used the word woke terms, like pregnant people, birth givers. Now, the reason that I can tie this into other things about how we define what it is that we experience as the underlying causality of why we experience what we experience versus how we communicate with each other, right, in the language of sound and light, and how that relates to how these wars are fought with words, crossword puzzles, the checkerboard square, what I call AI war gamers. And we get into the gender splitting technology, yeah, of magnets, negative and positive magnetic polarity, what it means to be fully integrated, experience being one, a monopole, where the two become the one becomes the all creation, because it began with the first breath, the first creative expression, which is eternal absolute love for all creation. And so banning words, what she said is that these words, these terms by which they're defined, and then who's going to determine what those letters as symbols, as character maps, because we're map reading the language that is represented by sound and light when we pronounce those letters that are assembled together in sequence. And so I was reminded when I learned early in childhood when they pass a bill like be ill, because now they're going to charge you electrons if you do not follow the rule-based functions, the way that terminals, computer terminals, codes, code talkers, codes are communicating to other codes, frequencies and antennas. So she's an antenna, and she's communicating with her antenna, which she's communicating to the people across the land who's listening to her mic, right? Her transmitter. So when I used to look at legislation, because I took a couple of law classes to see how they do this, programming, loading the programs into RAM, read active memory. And so they start out with what they, at the top of, included in a bill, like when they have the Federal Register, which is like an agency wants to pass a new rule having to do with behavioral algorithms. You're going to behave according to this rule, because if you don't, you're going to get tagged, right? Pay us. It's called pay the man. Pay to play. Record 1, play 2, the movie, right? So they would define the terms. They'd say, when you map read, the language that we're putting into this document, we're letting you know by virtue of putting the information in the window, the words or the letters that we're using by how they're arranged in nuclear sequence, how we define them as the rule makers. So you have to know the way that we define these letters as they're sequenced, because we're the ones that are deciding as the master slave driver how they are defined, so that as you read down the document to see what the rule is, you can understand the rules for which we're defining what you're map reading according to us, not you, us, because we're the ones that are passing the rule. And we're passing that rule on to you so you can load it in your memory and obey. Okay? And so this is when it gets really ridiculous because of going all the way back to childhood and playing what I used to call musical chairs with the language of deception, because that's what it is, because it's distorted. They're distorted sound waves. It's a distorted language. It doesn't represent the original 7 audible tones, which is the actual spin rotation of consciousness that is experiencing itself in perfect balance or full integration, so that we're not experiencing any tension, surface tension, right? Fire and water, fire and ice, so that the nerves are perfectly relaxed. Silence is golden fire. Yeah, and so that's why I mentioned in a video about allowing myself to be programmed into memory, the language that is represented, in this case, English, but it's never going to represent the amount of quantum energy that is represented by eternal love, because that much energy cannot be expressed under those terms, with those letters, the way that their nuclear cell phone sequence thus recorded. So it's a poor language translator in terms of quantum energy, which is consciousness that is communicating itself, right, in that format. And that's a format, which is a formatting code, which is a holographic codes, right, by virtue of the language they use versus the language that we use, which is the original language, which is the original language of mathematics, which is the original language of sound and light. Big difference. And so I got a little chuckle out of this, particularly when they use the words woke, right? And then the Great Awakening, what it means to be fully awake with your full sensors, which is your emotional sensory capacity through your heart and your soul to experience what we feel through others that we're connected to. Compassion, yeah. And healing. Yeah, healing within ourselves, which means doing the inner work. Yeah. And I it's funny how when we experience what we do at a higher rate of speed, it comes back to us at a slower rate of speed because they're running at a slower rate of speed. So when you get into server speeds and you realize that, for example, even in the clan and tribe community of those of us that came in here to do our jobs, it's funny how I can measure, I experience something I become aware of, and then they don't agree with that, and then they agree with it later on because they got the speed memo. So you can sort of measure, when you think of capacity of accretion levels of transmutation, how fast you can clear the servers, which means the morphogenetic field structure of cellular communication between DNA templates that we're running, the speed at which we become aware of what we become aware of, because then the data is going to change, and then that data is then reflected back to us, and it's like, I got the memo 6 months ago. You're now experiencing what that memo is because now you're transmitted that to others, and I become aware of what you're aware of. Yeah. And so now we're into data speeds. Now we're into, if you will, the blessing that being fully integrated has by virtue of the speed at which you're running and experiencing the language of sound and light. All right. And if you wanted to convert that into data and then you become aware of it in a thought form, then you become aware of what you're going to communicate in the future, which you already experienced by virtue of having recorded it because you experienced it at the time that it was recorded. Right? Future proves past, back to the future. What is the future we're going to experience? Yeah. So I thought I'd share that because you see how this is moving forward with them. You know, terms, nuclear language. Yeah. Have a great day. Bye now. Be good to yourselves.